So it is an absolute pleasure to introduce this, our last final panel conversation for today. I've known these gentlemen for a number of years. These are people who personally and professionally are playing critical roles in our public policy sphere and have a long history, 2 decades I would say, of being really attentive to the needs of making sure that we're bringing everybody into responsible financial products and services. So I am happy to introduce, at the far left, Chris Brummer. For those of you who don't know him, he is the founder of FinTech Week. He's also faculty director of Georgetown's Institute of International Economic Law. And he's going to be engaged in, as well as moderating, a conversation with Don Graves, Deputy Commerce Secretary, and Michael Barr, Vice Chair of Bank Supervision at the Federal Reserve. So without further ado, please join me in thanking them. All right, take it away. Make it spicy.
And thank you so much to Melissa. You know, she also now gets to sort of feel the joy of organizing and corralling such a great conference, and really major congratulations to her. I guess I'll start with sort of the bear case. We're optimistic. We're going to start with the bull case for AI first, and then we'll move into the bear case, and then to all the wonderful sort of regulatory issues. You know, I am just so pleased and delighted to be with both of you gentlemen. Your expertise and your sort of supervisory authority covers very different sort of aspects and realms of the economy. But, you know, Don, I think we'll just start with you, since you're closest to me. You know, when you think about AI and the bull case, particularly when you think about questions like financial inclusion, what have you seen? What do you sense? And what are you hearing about AI?
Chris, thank you for that. And Melissa, I hate to tell you this, but Michael and I were talking, it's 3 decades that we've been doing this together. So let me take a step back before I get right to your question. Sure. A little spin. The world is changing. You guys have spent the whole day hearing how the world is changing, discussing the ways that it's changing. Maybe changing even more than we're thinking about today. So obviously AI has already changed the way that we operate our businesses, the innovation that's going on. But you think about the critical emerging technologies that are all arising at the same time. You think about things like the new types of semiconductors that are being developed, the AI-powered, that will change the processing capacity, speed at which we're able to use the new models that we're developing for AI. And then you think about quantum computing. And quantum computing is not just an evolution, it's like a whole new revolution for the way that we use these computers to think about solving the challenges that we face. So we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be in a place that I don't think anyone could have guessed that we would be in a decade ago, and maybe we can't even imagine what it's going to be like right now when you combine all of those pieces together. So what that means is that it gives us huge opportunities, and I'll talk more about the non-financial side because I'll let my friend talk about that. But you think about the types of things that we can do with that AI is already powering and will continue to power. So development of cures for cancer, that right now we can't even imagine how we would do it, but AI will be able to help us solve that. The types of ways of training individuals. So a lot of people, I'm not getting to the bull case yet, but a lot of people are worried about AI, but it's going to open up pathways for folks that had never had the opportunity to learn, had never found ways that worked for them, and maybe were located in places around the world where typically they weren't able to get the type of educational pathways that they might have in some of our best schools here in the US. So there's real opportunities there, and the innovations that it's going to power the opportunities for inclusion are I think, going to change the way that we think about things like financial inclusion, the ways that we allow for folks who have been dealt out of the system to work, or those who didn't necessarily have the pathways up. Those are going to be good, and again, the innovations are going to be just rampant.
Well, it's really interesting because, quantum, it's hard to tell, is that a bull case or the bear case, particularly in terms of how it could be applied in the future. But, thinking about your answer on financial inclusion, what strikes me a little bit is that these are, I guess maybe it's the latest episode in sort of responses people have used for varying forms of technology. Certainly financial technology in different iterations has been around for a while, and people have tried to deploy innovative technologies in ways to sort of open up the credit box or to open up financial opportunities. I guess when we move a little bit closer into the central banking world, and maybe we can compare and contrast a little bit, sticking with the bull case for the moment, I mean, where do you see AI being possibly deployed in a way that's most effective?
Well, let me start really at the same level Don did, because I think it's really quite important to think about this in terms of its potential effect overall on the economy. That's going to be the biggest effect. There are also some particular things we can talk about in finance, but if you think about the potential for generative AI to change the economy, it's about productivity and it's about the composition of the workforce. And this is, very early days, and you want to be careful, but generative AI is already probably improving productivity in the workplace in ways that we will measure 5 years from now, and that will become more important 5 years from now. And they're, in some cases, in very small ways, improving the productivity of the sales force, improving call centers, improving fraud detection. These are kind of in a sense, the low-hanging fruit. They matter a lot in terms of increasing productivity, particularly for lower skilled parts of the workforce. The increase in productivity that's been demonstrated so far is very, very large. So you take a low-performing call center worker and you turn them into a very high-performing call center worker. You take a decent performing call center worker, you make them a higher-performing call center worker. So that matters. And that is likely, increasing productivity, and will be increasing it over time. But it's not fundamentally transformative in that sense. It's like other kinds of inventions. If it operates at that level, it matters a lot. It matters like electricity matters a lot. Mm-hmm. But once you get the benefits of electricity and everybody learns how to plug in the thing that they're plugging in, it doesn't increase the rate of productivity. It matters, but it's kind of a temporary effect in the level of productivity. What could really matter with generative AI, and this goes to Don's comment about cancer, is if generative AI changes the productivity of research and development fundamentally in the economy, the way the scientific method did for discovering cancer or curing disease or doing other things in the economy. And that could be really transformative. If this is the kind of product that improves the productivity of R&D, and it can also improve its own productivity. So if AI is improving the productivity of itself, and it is improving the productivity of R&D, that could be quite transformative. And as Don points out, it's also linked to the hardware, which is getting much better, and could be a big leap if we get to use AI to help actually improve quantum computing, which then is able to help AI get better. That is an amazing synergy. And some people think, I'm not at all an expert at this thing I'm about to say, but I'll just say some people say that also it would actually could help with energy development. So if you combine AI with quantum, they both get better, and then it turns out they're better able to, say, control nuclear fusion. Well, that would actually be a big deal for producing the energy that you now need to do better AI and better quantum computing. So the potential is very, very large. The reality right now is very, very small. And so there are big questions about whether we're heading to that world or not heading to that world.
Okay, so now I instinctively want to make this into a game of, commerce versus the Fed. It's like financial system innovation for AI versus non-financial system AI, right? Because it's kind of interesting. You're hearing.
You're gonna have a hard time getting Don and I to go at each other.
I'll find a way. You know those Fed people.
I know.
But it's
Sticks
really,
in the mud.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's kind of interesting because what I'm hearing from the vice chair for supervision of the Federal Reserve System is giving a bunch of examples that are actually outside of the financial system, right? Number one, and I'm also hearing even when it comes to sort of the data analytics, like picking things up 5 years from now, that makes a lot of sense. I was in Singapore with some regulators, and they had sort of mentioned also as well that the pickup, particularly for AI, had been slow, and I had sort of observed that, well, that's because a bunch of startups are doing it, because they are regulated financial institutions, and so therefore it'll take a bit longer for them to find mechanisms and systems to do so in a way that won't cause them more problems than the problems that they solve. I've totally now taken that message and just totally mangled it. But so is it true that the non-financial system, the outside of the financial system, we should be seeing more AI applications that you think are going to have those outsized GDP impacts than you would see in the financial system? And then again, getting back to that financial inclusion question, are there certain kinds of inroads that you think could really be something interesting or exciting to you?
I think I will go back to what Sam Altman said earlier in the day. I think it was earlier in the day. He was talking about how we test out models and how we continue to evolve AI. And on the financial services side, our financial information, we should be rightfully concerned about testing, trying out new approaches, innovating in that space with AI, because we don't know the direction that it can go. So it's better to test it in less sensitive areas of our economy. Now, having said that, we talked about development of new health technologies, drug development, and the like. Innovation in a constrained environment where you have guardrails, where you have safety built into the system, is certainly one of the directions that we should be going. And I think you're going to see a lot of companies that are going to want to do that, but they're looking to the federal government, whether it's a financial regulator or Department of Commerce and our National Institutes of Standards and Technology, that's developing frameworks and guidance and standards in order to move the industry forward, in order to use AI effectively. It's very important for us all to agree on what are the safe and sound approaches. How do we ensure protection of individual privacy? And how do we set these standards in a way that we get our partners around the world to agree with us and that the approach that we're taking is the right way? So I think you're going to see a number of companies that are not inside the financial services industry that are driving this work, but I think it will eventually get to the financial services industry, but you have to do it in a way that respects safety and principles of safety and soundness, and that we have agreement on guardrails. And if we have to be the ones that set those standards in the United States and with our partners and allies, so that we don't have others who have different approaches, who have different value sets. They will set very different standards from us, and that may not redound to our benefit.
So I didn't give you the chance to talk about the bear case for AI, but certainly inside of that answer, there were already some nuggets, and I'll circle back to you. But since we are with the Fed guy, we can ask him some of those questions. What I find kind of interesting, already is a conversation about, less sensitive areas of the economy, but where there may be pretty dramatic impacts for GDP. It still strikes me, the financial system isn't small. Your backyard is pretty big, but there's generally, as I said, a bit of a time lag before regulations go to production, if one will, that kind of enable new technologies. For you, what do you see as the bear case for AI, and what does that ultimately mean or look like for you in terms of how do you get AI into production in safe ways for the financial system?
Well, like with any technology, there are lots of things that can go wrong. But maybe I'll highlight just a few in the area of financial stability and consumer protection. So there's lots of upside potential for AI to open up the financial system to new innovations that reduce costs and improve financial efficiency. But you worry, for example, in the financial stability space about the way in which generative AI might in the future, not today, but might in the future be deployed. Banks have been using artificial intelligence, machine learning for many decades, but generative AI is a special category of case. You might worry about the way in which generative AI models are very concentrated and correlated with each other. And if you have a handful of generative AI models produced by the largest providers of Gen AI models, the largest tech companies, which is the direction probably that we're going, and you have ubiquity in the use of those models, you have real risk that you'll see herding behavior in the market, and that generative AI might facilitate contagion in the market. Generative AI might behave in ways that are conducive to instability in order to achieve their objective function of earning money and trading on that instability. If you combine that ubiquity with speed, which is already present in the market, and automaticity, that is taking the human out of the loop, which is not currently in the market, but again, you can imagine a future state in which we evolve towards that. If you have ubiquity and speed and automaticity together, that can be a real recipe for instability in the financial system. So we're not worried about that today, but when you think about long term, the kinds of things you want to make sure we don't do, don't combine those three things in a way without guardrails. Let's make sure that we keep the human in the loop. Let's make sure that we understand what the rules of the road are. The right human in the right loop.
Yeah,
no, it's true. It's true. I mean, we're joking a little bit about it, but people like to say, well, this will be okay because we have a human in the loop.
Yeah.
But where in the loop are they? What are their tasks that they've been assigned? What are the rules? What's the constitution of the AI that they're dealing with?
What are their values?
Do they have a way of ensuring alignment of the generative AI with the rules that have been established? Do they have a way of testing it? So human in the loop is kind of a shorthand that can let people off the hook. We need to make sure that human in the loop really means the right human in the right stage of each part of the loop that we're talking about. So big picture, long term, again, not today. Today, the financial sector is being, I think, super careful and cautious in the use of generative AI, behaving appropriately so, having the right governance in place, keeping humans in the loop, being very careful. Most of the work that's being done now in the financial sector is of the first variety I described. It's improving call center performance. It's improving sales outreach. It's starting to be used or tested in things like fraud detection or cybersecurity detection. People are being very careful. So what I'm talking about is, what are the things we want to avoid in the future by being prudent now in the governance we have over AI? And I'll just mention briefly, in the consumer space, and I know your last panel was talking about it, the other issue is, how do you make sure that AI is used to expand access and not to reinforce bias? in the system, with good data and good models and second chance programs and other ways that are protective of consumers and not another tool to cause bias and discrimination in our society.
I'm going to follow up, and then I'm going to go to the competitiveness question, because I think commerce can have a very interesting sort of view, even as vis-a-vis the Federal Reserve. But just to follow up on something, I mean, a lot of the issues that you identified, certainly for some people in the audience who have been longstanding sort of watchers of technology, these questions about your models, questions about automation and what that means, seem to be sort of, on the one hand, yet sort of the latest chapter of a longstanding story in the evolution of technology and how it's being deployed. But at the same time, there are some interesting sort of perhaps quirks, or at least trade-offs that, from a regulatory standpoint, I suppose regulators have to sort of figure out, which is, on the one hand, you don't want to have this concentration risk that you're identifying, where everybody's depending on the same model, and if there's a quirk or a problem or something, it kind of blows up the financial system. At the same time, as I was listening, I was thinking to myself, well, that sounds like the advantages of a more open source or decentralized system. But the challenge, obviously, then is if you have an open source or decentralized system, what's the regulatory capacity, to develop a kind of open source framework, and what would that even look like, and what does that even mean? And certainly, the overall trend of open source, the overall trend of decentralization is really becoming a very dominant sort of directional theme in technology today, and just sort of figuring that out seems to be like something I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do any time, and that could create sort of delays in terms of how either industry figures out or how industry with the government figures it out. And that in turn, which is, well, I'll have an answer, but then I'll get to you, Don, on the competitiveness question. Depending on sort of the values of other different kinds of countries or human beings or the like, it could lead to a little bit of a faster sort of go-to-market. For you, do you have any thoughts about, if not what the outcome is, what the process is to sort of get to those answers in a way that's fast enough to get to market? And I guess as an educational question, I think it's kind of interesting, to what degree do regulators nowadays consider or think about that competitiveness question as they go about their problem solving for safety and soundness?
So there are lots of questions embedded in that.
There were two questions. There were
but let me just give you an example in the an aspect of the competitive landscape that you might not be thinking about, but I think is important. So that's fraud. So fraud is this great case where generative AI can be used to reduce fraud, to detect fraud, to counteract fraud. It might be an important tool to do that, but when banks use their fraud tools, they have to test them and make sure that they're performing accurately, that they're not kicking people out of the system or freezing bank accounts or stopping checks that should go through. They have to be super careful, they have to be in a controlled environment, and they have to take the time to get that right, and that's good. Then you take fraud, the other side of fraud, which are the fraudsters using generative AI. They actually don't have to test it. They don't have to be sure it works. They don't have to do anything. They'll just throw it out in the field. And if some of it comes through, that's great. And if the rest doesn't come through, they don't care. So there's an asymmetry in the environment that generative AI can be deployed in between the bad guys and the good guys that is a different kind of competition than the one you're talking about, but I think is an important dynamic in this marketplace.
The Fed has a big job. The other regulators will as well, sort of figuring out that AI path. From a commerce standpoint, number one, you do have significant, you specifically have had specific regulatory expertise and supervisory authority over all kinds of things, buried in NIST and other national security things that if you told us, we'd, I guess, get arrested for.
No, I'd go to jail.
Right.
Well, then go ahead and just tell us. So certainly, some of these thoughts, there is some overlap, at least, with the Federal Reserve System in terms of, sort of how do you make sure that there are certain kinds of safeguards. But a large part of your mandate is also the international competition question that you've already mentioned. How do you figure out that policy path? Where does competition fit into your concerns? I mean, if we're trying to balance on the one hand national security with market integrity or financial stability and national security, that seems like a really hard thing to balance. I mean, how do you get from here to there in a way that allows for the development of useful innovations while at the same time ensuring both our competitiveness and our financial stability?
I love this question. And the reason I love this question is because it allows me to talk about everything that I've seen at the Commerce Department over the last few years. Most people have no idea what the Commerce Department is. They say, oh, it's the Department of Business. I call it America's hall closet. I've called it that for a while. And that's not a pejorative. That's a good thing, because if you need something, you're always going to look in your hall closet for it. So it's America's hall closet. Commerce Department is 13 bureaus, and I'm not going to give the whole story, but you've already talked about National Institutes of Standards and Technology, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and National Weather Service. It's our favorite, one of our, no, I can't say that right now.
I can say it.
You can say it. The Bureau of Industry and Security, which you alluded to on the national security side, which handles export controls and protects against the advancement, by using technology, the advancement of other countries for their dual-use military purposes. Economic Development Administration. The reason I say all of this is because you have to have a balanced approach to the work that we do in the federal government. We are also the advocates within the federal government and around the world of U.S. business. So we are the Department of Business in that respect. Right now, frontier models of AI, generative AI, are being developed by a small subset of companies. And so we, at the direction of the president, he signed the executive order just over a year ago on AI. We have been working directly with these companies. We've done red teaming work. We've looked at safety and soundness. We've done the testing of their models. We've looked at the ways that they're using their models. And we've proposed rules around them providing us with information on how they're using their models and the ways that they test for things like safety and soundness. That's critically important for our organization to do. And it's for all those reasons that I talked about earlier about making sure that we're setting the standards. And because there's no federal regulator that has oversight of all of the industry, that at least at the Department of Commerce, we have the ability to set standards and guidance, the guardrails for industry, for the development of generative AI. At the same time, we have to invest, to get back to your competitiveness piece, we have to invest in ways that will allow for the innovation, for the growth and development of a more holistic industry than we have right now. And so part of this is also thinking about how we ensure that there's a democratization that goes along with AI. It's not just about making sure that these handful of companies that are doing unbelievable work, and they've been great partners, are going to do in the future. We want them to be competitive and be the world's leaders so that we can keep our leadership here and our competitiveness in this country and with our partners and allies. But it's also about making sure that small and mid-sized companies are able to innovate. So I think about 30 years ago when we were talking about, and Melissa, we're talking about things like electronic banking and the rollout of ATMs, and you looked at what the French were doing with, back in the day, their set-top boxes, Minitel and the Teletel, for those that remember, and the things that we could learn from their innovation. Well, there are things that the federal government can do to invest in ways that help reduce risk or help smaller and mid-sized companies take risks that they might not take otherwise. So that is a critical part of what we're doing. And also work, again, with our partners and allies around the world so that we're doing this in concert. Again, so that we're looking at safety and soundness, we're looking at the protection of individuals and consumers, that we're also, and the bad, malign actors, protecting against that. And we're doing it in a way so that the US continues to be the place where the leadership of the world in development of generative AI continues to be the case. So all of that has to happen, and the great thing is the Commerce Department is at the center of the action for all of those different things.
So, one reason why I really love that answer is that it really highlights a philosophical and a pragmatic question about, you know, who should be the risk taker when it comes to new and innovative technologies. You know, and I, you know, on the one hand, I think there's a question of trying to make sure that the largest actors, in some ways, take the fewest or the least amount of risk to the extent to which there are externalities that end up falling on everybody else. At the same time, sometimes they're the only ones with the resources and able to, who can actually do it. But then there's still this question of sort of the smaller companies, right? And those smaller companies, I'm going to use the word companies as very, very broadly to include whether or not it be startups, whether or not it be commercial companies who are looking to deploy their AI in a new and innovative way, whether or not it be an MDI or a CDFI, whether or not it be a fintech company, whether or not it be a blockchain company, whatever it is, right? Like there's this other sort of box or categories of companies. One thing I was struck with the DC FinTech Week conference was, you know, this sense that sometimes, you know, California sort of makes it and the rest of the world kind of adopts it, and it doesn't necessarily sort of permeate the rest of the United States, whether or not it be for whatever reason. Sometimes it's in the financial inclusion world. Sometimes it just be it doesn't sort of catch on. I mean, and I was just sort of struck by that. And when you sort of think about this question of size, you know, certainly the technology conversation has been very big lately. I mean, who should be the risk taker in AI? And is that a different story from sort of previous iterations of technology that comes up? I mean, is there something qualitatively different about who should be taking those risks when it comes to AI?
I think it's a mixture. There are certain risks that can only be taken by companies that have size and scale, that have technical capacity to do it. So, you know, some of the companies that were here, and many of them are California companies, but they're all over the country. They have enough already invested that they are going to be more successful. So we should be working alongside them to ensure that they are doing it in a way that is effective, that they're allowed to innovate and grow to scale. But at the same time, we should be looking for opportunities to create pathways for new innovators that come from all over the country, frankly. And that's where I think the work that we're doing all together to allow for folks who've never participated in specific industries that could use AI, generative AI, as a means for getting into an industry, or to come up with innovations within the AI industry as a whole. That's what we have to do, but we have to be very thoughtful about it. And we have to, this is where the our friends in the regulatory agencies certainly can help. Capital is the name of the game, and if you aren't able to bring capital in and drive it to some of these innovators, folks who have good ideas but may not have connections, then you're going to end up with just those handful of companies that already have scale and have deep pockets to drive that innovation.
I'll ask you the same question, and I don't have to repeat it, and you don't have to say I'm asking you a lot of questions.
So, you know, I do think that the way that sector has evolved in this short period of time gives enormous advantage to a handful of very, very large companies, given the enormous investment that's required to play in this space. But at the same time, there are lots of innovators who are, you know, linking up with generative AI, where the barriers to entry are very, very low. You know, you have people working on apps. There's no barrier to entry to app development to link the very capital-intensive work of building a model with a front-end consumer or business application. So I guess, you know, I think of, if you look more broadly at the ecosystem that's being developed because of this new technology, I do think it will end up being dispersed throughout the economy. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be some very, very big winners in this race, but there's also going to be benefit, I think, to businesses throughout the economy as they're able to plug themselves into that new system and to generate new content of their own. You know, one of the things that I think made generative AI so exciting to people is that you went from very, very low adoption to very massive adoption in a very short period of time, like off the chair. I mean, all of you have seen the same charts that I have showing adoption rates for different technologies over time, but off the chart faster. And what that means is that lots of people all over the country and all over the world are innovating with that new technology and coming up with ideas that, you know, people hadn't thought of a year ago or 2 years ago, and that will generate the opportunity for them to participate in this broader change in our economy if it goes in that direction.
Okay. I'll end with the question of that question of who gets a shot at innovating, right? When you go out west, there's usually a sort of a group of either VCs or larger companies who can use that technology. How can either industry or regulators innovate in terms of opening up pathways so that the people who are actually using those technologies represent all of America, but also, again, to actually be able to solve all of the different kinds of problems that Americans face in their everyday lives? I'll start with you, Don, and then end with Michael.
So I go back to democratization. Part of this is access, and the good thing is that we are making access to high-speed internet available to every household, every family, every business, every community in the country. That's something that I can say for now, this administration has been delivering. Why is that important? Because if you don't have access to high-speed internet, you're not going to be able to utilize generative AI to do much of anything. That's going to be a game changer. But making sure that people have access to the fundamentals of how to utilize AI, I think is going to be critically important. Access to credit and capital, so the capital that you need to invest. So yes, anyone can come up with an app and use generative AI to help them do whatever it is that they're trying to develop with that app. But
you still may need $1 million.
You need $1 million to take that idea and turn it into something.
Yeah.
So that's another area where we can help. And again, I go back to the things that we can do to protect against, it's stealing of intellectual property, it's the allowing people to get access to markets across the globe. Those are the things that are going to allow our innovators, wherever they may be, they might be in the Bay Area, but they might be in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. And we should lift them up and give them the tools that they need to be successful while protecting against the abuses.
Michael?
Well, I'll just say, maybe I'll take it up a level. Many people in this audience have been working on issues of access to credit and capital for many decades. And the one thing that I think you can say is if you don't approach the work with intentionality, if you don't approach the work with the goal up front that you want to bring everybody along, then you're not going to get there. It won't happen just because. So I think at a higher level, you know, as we're looking at generative AI and as we've looked at other technologies in the past, we need to make sure that we have our values straight up front and then have rules of the road that are consistent with those values.
And it goes back to that to the issue of the human being. You know, I was in a meeting just earlier today where people talked about the soft skills of the human being who's involved, and you know, it's not just about having training in engineering, but also some kind of training in terms of understanding what the implications of your technology really are. Thank you so very, very much to both of you. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I learned a lot.
Great as always.